Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back. We're back with Live from the Heartland for the week of January 13th. I'm Michael James, and I went to a memorial recently for a friend, and I ran into our next guest, who I've known for a long time. He used to come around the Heartland Cafe. He was involved in political campaigns and looking for support. He has an analytical bent. He is a fan of the Grateful Dead, and he is someone who I've always listened to and paid attention to. And we decided that he would come on and initially talk about a struggle going on in the community up in Evanston around the building of a new football stadium. And regular listeners to the show know that we've been following the scandal at Northwestern, the big comeback there, and most recently they had a bowl win. But there is also in the community some tug of war going on, and I'm bringing on our friend Jeff Smith to talk a little bit about that. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are, whatever time it is. How are you, Jeff?
I'm doing great, Michael. Great to see you, and Happy New Year.
Same to you. Well, let's just start off with the Dyke Stadium question. Now, it's right there for those people who are up in Evanston once in a while. If they ever go by Mustard's Last Stand for a hot dog or a Polish, right behind that or to the side and a little bit to the north is Dyke Stadium, home of the Wildcats football team, who did have a good year. What's going on up there, Jeff?
Well, right now, the city council allegedly, and I use that in quote marks, voted to rezone the area, the district that contains not only the stadium, but the basketball arena, the baseball field, and some other fields and facilities. And the controversy is more about the rezoning and the use of the district than it is about a new stadium. I think the average person, even who lives in the neighborhood, says, hey, they're a private institution. If they want to, build a new building, they can do that. Although, why would you tear down, a 100-year-old building? Harvard and Yale both have stadiums that were built in 1904 and 1905, and they're doing just fine. And I think they have a good reputation, except
in football, not so much.
At least in at least with the balance of academics and athletics. So the real controversy was that on one level, a residential neighborhood is just the wrong place for an entertainment district. Northwestern was maintaining it could not possibly operate this stadium unless they had. Initially, they wanted a dozen full-scale stadium concerts of up to 35,000 each, and an unlimited number of events of up to 10,000 each. And the neighborhood said it's not right. It's a residential neighborhood. You would not build something like that there today. It only exists because it's grandfathered in, and people move in saying, what about the stadium? And the realtors say, don't worry, there's only 6, 7, 8 games a year. It's not that big a deal. Although with the basketball games, you do end up with traffic, and that Central Street is the main artery for a Region 1 trauma center. Evanston Hospital it's a state highway. It's the principal gateway for a couple of Northwestern's largest employers. On another level, though, it's not just about Evanston disregarding its own law and its own principles, which it did in order to move this forward. But when I say disregard its own law, their own law says you have to have a majority of the council, and they define the council as 9 aldermen and 1 mayor. So that's 10. So you need 6 votes to pass, and they passed it with only 5. And so that's one of the. It's in a lawsuit right now that I'm not part of, thankfully, and part of that will be decided by the courts. But on a larger level, there were really more disturbing aspects of oligarchy, of co-option, of the weaponized racialization of non-racial issues, and on a meta sense, the institutional drift away from core purposes and constituencies.
Well, that's a lot of stuff. Do you want to go into any of the details about like racism and stuff?
Well, a stadium on its superficial aspect shouldn't have nothing to do with race, but the constant problem of the 1% or the 1% of the 1% is how do you get people to vote against their own self-interest, and that's true on a national level as well. In order to do that, you've got to divide the population, and so promises of jobs and promises of contributions to this or that cause or program, get made, and it's become almost institutionalized in Illinois, which is possibly one of the greatest natural habitats in the United States of pay to play.
Even though we're one of the bluest states in the world.
Well, they're not; those are not mutually exclusive, and you and I have the scars to show from battling to try and make the Democratic Party more democratic over many years, and we may get into that later. But basically it was a largely grassroots, middle class activist base, as well as an alliance with some students who were pushing for unionization of the grad students and the TAs at Northwestern, and folks who have issues with Northwestern having such a large endowment and not making what they viewed as a sufficient contribution to the community. So those all kind of played together in order to defeat that. Even though Evanston has all these laws and planning principles saying that you reach out to the neighborhood and you engage the neighborhoods and you have a partnership with the folks who live there, instead, they basically isolated and circled and tried to organize against the people who were closest to the impact of this stadium.
Jeff Smith, what is the current status of the stadium? Do you think it will end up getting built? And what has been the role of Daniel Biss, who is the mayor, who is a guy who was a senator? We didn't always agree with him, but we liked him. We were supportive of him when he ran for governor. We're happy with our current governor, too. Then Daniel ran for mayor and he won, but I'm not sure he's playing the best role in this struggle over a new stadium. Your take?
Well, the stadium is in limbo right now because of a lawsuit that the Most Livable City Association and a number of residents of Wilmette and Evanston filed, challenging the process by which it took place, including not just the 5 votes versus 6 votes aspect I mentioned, but other aspects of procedural and substantive due process. So that'll have to play out before it goes forward. I think the 5 votes, 6 votes thing is actually pretty clear. And if I was an attorney on the case, I'd probably be preparing a motion for summary judgment on that. Now, Daniel cast what was considered to be the tie-breaking vote. There was one of the aldermen that didn't vote. So you had only 8 voting alder people, and they tied, those 8 tied 4-4, and Daniel cast a 5th vote. I think Daniel has injured his brand. And I say this with regret because, I've knocked on doors for Daniel in 3 or 4 towns, written him checks, helped organize events for him, stuffed envelopes for him at my dining room table with him and his wife sitting there. So, we go back, when we were both in DFA and,
What's DFA?
Democracy for America was the offshoot of Howard Dean's failed presidential campaign, and he tried to encourage people to, work on campaigns, run for office, basically up their participation in the democratic process with a small d, although oriented towards the capital D Democratic Party. But I think Daniel took some knocks in this to his reputation, whether it's deserved or not. He was seen as siding with money and it being an opportunistic play rather than in accord with the door knocking type of brand that he sought to cultivate, coming up.
Well, let's leave it at that. So there's a suit in the works, and we don't know if the stadium will be built or not, but money tends to talk, particularly in Illinois, and we'll see what happens. In any event, I hope that Mustard's Last Stand still stands, and we get to go up there for a Polish about once a year. You know, you have a lot of interest in a lot of things. Earlier, we were talking about peace, justice, climate. We got into the Middle East, and you felt like people should really speak out more. Um, I do want to address the whole issue of making the Democratic Party more democratic, but let's do that at the end. Why don't you talk a little bit now about some of the things that you think are real important that people got to pay attention to and begin to speak out on?
Well, climate, of course, is existential. Okay, people say, well, will it be the end of the planet? No, the planet will continue, whether or not there's humans on it, and we can function in a society that is acceptable to us, rather than coming out of our pods or into some sort of post-apocalypse.
Caves, living in caves.
Yeah, with us cockroaches and Keith Richards, right? So that is something, I pulled out a brochure from 1990 where I had global warming on it. And I think possibly I was the first candidate in Illinois to be talking about and actively campaigning on, what's now called climate change. So this is something that's concerned me for a long time. And, I don't understand the Republican approach at all, which is basically, Trump now cheerleading drill, 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 and they want to drive the car off the cliff at 90 miles an hour. And the Democrats' response is to say, no, that's a terrible idea. Let us drive the car and we'll slow down the speed down to 70.
Good one. That's good.
But we'll stop every once in a while and do, and let different people steer. So it'll be more equitable along the way. But you're still heading towards the same cliff. So Robin Gable, your friend and mine, and I worked
State rep from our district.
We worked 11 years ago and passed a bill with bipartisan, near unanimous support to establish a framework for offshore wind in Lake Michigan. And let's be real, you're not going to get to the change that we need to see without utility scale renewable energy. Solar panels on rooftops are fine, but it's too slow, too inefficient, and only in the lake, where you've got this enormous source of energy, and you could put it 10 miles offshore so you don't have the transmission lines problem. Only with that type of power are you going to get to the change we needed, that we actually needed about 5 to 10 years ago. So we passed this bill, and a couple key components of it never got done by the executive. Okay, so Rauner left office, Pritzker came in. We again went down Springfield, and Robin, Laura Fine, they passed a bill. Again, it had near unanimous bipartisan support to move forward on the Economic Development Task Force that would say how we plug this into the grid and how we make it work into the rate structure in Illinois. Pritzker signed it, because it passed near unanimously. It still hasn't been implemented 5 years later. So I just look at what Democrats seem to be preoccupied with, as opposed to what they ought to be preoccupied with. And it's caused me a great deal of dismay. I can't call myself responsibly a Democrat anymore. And I don't know that, if we have 3 or 5 or 17 genders, why should we be forced into a binary choice with political parties?
Well, I do hope you'll vote if it's a question of keeping someone else out of office. I'm sure you will. But that's climate change. What are some other issues that you think that we're lacking on attention to?
Well, there's a lot of attention to what's going on in Palestine, the Gaza Strip, but it's not just the Strip itself. I mean, if you're a thinking, reading, and aware person, you can't. It's almost hard to sleep at night. Obviously, Ukraine is a horrible situation as well, but we're not funding Russia. We don't claim to be an ally of Russia, and what's going on in the Gaza Strip is horrific, as is the rhetoric and what I think it's doing to our body politic. And I don't understand the reticence of some so-called progressives to to call out what's really a matter of right and wrong. This is something that's not only horrible to people who are being bombed and forced out of their houses. And let's be real, this is the greatest per capita mass killing and displacement I think that we've seen anywhere in decades. Probably more people were displaced from their homes in Ukraine, but they had other places in Ukraine to go to. And on a per capita basis, it's even greater. And I think the beginning of the approach to it has to be to change some of the language. And there's a war going on about language, okay, where what you say is being heavily contested. I would not call this a war. The common line goes, this is a war that began on October 7th, and it's a matter of self-defense, and it's existential. And I say this as a person who has no Arab heritage and a significant amount of Jewish heritage, and I've worked. I don't want to go into the some of my best friends kind of thing, okay? But I've associated with, worked with, partied with, been arm in arm with, plenty of good progressive and sometimes not so progressive Jewish folks over the years. I've always maintained that Israel has a right to exist, et cetera, et cetera. But it's hard to call this a war when only one side has tanks. Only one side has an air force. Only one side has a navy. There hasn't been even a functioning airport in the Gaza Strip for years. You can't get in and out without Israeli permission. So it's very, very, very one-sided. Second, self-defense. If a bunch of gangbangers broke into my house and butchered members of my family, I would obviously be outraged. Horrified. I want retribution and, to do whatever I could against them. But it's not self-defense if I find out that there's some of the members of the attacking, group, the marauders, are down at the schoolyard, a couple blocks away, and I go out with an AR-15 and just spray the schoolyard and then accuse if I take out 10 kids along the way, accuse the gangbangers of using them as human shields. It's obviously difficult to conduct any type of military operation in a densely populated area. But what we're seeing, I think, it can't really be called self-defense. Israel did not face an existential military threat from Hamas, relatively speaking, even though they have more munitions than seems possible, given the essential blockade of Gaza, they're relatively speaking pea shooters. And it didn't begin on October 7th. You and I and every thinking person knows that there's a long history here going back decades. Go back to what a book that Baruch Kimmerling wrote in almost 20 years ago called Politicide. Go take a look at Jimmy Carter's book, called Apartheid. And there's some errors with any writing that occurs on this region, but I think the mask has been ripped off, and what we're seeing is an overt attempt to destroy the possibility of a second viable, a second state in a two-state process.
We're going to run out of time, so I want to take this opportunity to invite you back on next month to continue talking about stuff. But a couple things that you had talked about, making the Democratic Party more democratic. You had talked about kind of your disenchantment with the Democratic Party on a lot of fronts. And we both are watching very closely, I think, the split in the Democrats right now around Israel and Palestine. And I'm just wondering how you think Biden should handle the situation where he has the youth voters overwhelmingly coming out and supporting Palestine, very well organized demonstrations all around the country. And it's a conundrum for him. So in making the Democratic Party more democratic, that's a long one. But what do you think about the situation for Biden and the party going forward into November?
It's a tough one, and I'm not running for president, and I'm not on Biden's staff, but I think you have to put principles first. If you stand for peace, if you stand for justice, then you say what gets us closer to that direction, and to what extent do lives really matter? Okay, anybody's life. I mean, the Highland Park shooting, which was a horrific massacre by someone of dubious mental capacity, should not have had any type of firearm, but 7 people died. Any death is horrible. I just went to a funeral yesterday. They're all sad, but 7 people, that served as the trigger for a sweeping law that affects the firearms rights of hundreds of thousands of Illinoisans. Meanwhile, we've got 20,000 people dead by any conservative estimate in Gaza Strip. And what do we hear from politicians as a collective shrug? That just does not resonate, not just with young people. I don't think I can be called a teenager anymore. I think
you're good though.
I don't know what to tell Biden, what to do. I think I think we really have to re-examine the reflexive nature of our relationship. And I don't want to say with Israel, because the Netanyahu administration is not synonymous with the people of Israel. There's so many good people in Israel as there are in every country, and in would-be countries like Gaza. But Michael, you're my friend, okay? But if you're standing on someone else's neck, I am not going to stand with you.
Right on.
I'm going to push you off. So, in terms of the Democratic, you can't win by being all things to all people. Trump didn't win that way. And there are going to be other candidates in the mix. I'm not. There's a lot of problems with the Biden candidacy that go beyond Palestine and the Middle East. And if Biden switches directions now, and then they call him a flip-flopper. If he continues on the path he's on, there's going to be a lot of disenchantment. The media needs to stop reporting it as Trump versus Biden, Biden versus Trump, because Kennedy's going to be in the mix, Jill Stein's going to be in the mix, and I think voters are going to have to calibrate how they use their vote, in that way.
There may be other people coming too. We'll see what happens. Jeff, you were great. I really I like listening to you. I hope my questions get sharper next time I have you on. But please come back on live from the Heartland.
I'm happy to do so anytime, Michael. Thank you for having me.
Right on.